Welcome back to Stoic Wisdom. A man who chases validation from the world will always be at its mercy, but a man who knows his worth does not need to seek it. He doesn't fear losing interest because his focus is never on the approval of others, especially not on the approval of one. When you stop seeking, you become powerful. When you stop chasing, you start to lead. When a woman first realizes that you've lost interest, her reaction is often one of confusion and disbelief. The sudden shift in your behavior may be unsettling for her, as it disrupts the familiar dynamic she has come to expect. Women are naturally intuitive, and they often sense subtle changes in the energy between you before anything is outwardly expressed. This can lead to an initial shock, not because she's unaware of the distance growing between you, but because she did not expect it to reach the point of emotional disengagement. The initial shock is often less about the reality of the situation, and more about the disruption of the emotional stability she once felt. For a moment, everything she thought she understood about the relationship feels uncertain. Her mind starts racing to make sense of the change. She'll question herself, her actions, and her worth in the context of your connection. The sense of loss she feels in that moment can stir a whirlwind of emotions, from sadness to frustration. However, the shock is often temporary. It's simply a reflection of her emotional investment and the abruptness of the change. Unlike men who often compartmentalize emotions, women tend to experience and process them more openly. This means that the shock can be powerful, but it won't last indefinitely. It's the first layer of reaction, the surface-level response before deeper questions emerge. In this moment, it's important to recognize that the shock is not a reflection of her weakness, but rather a sign of how deeply she was connected to the emotional bond. Her response, while intense, is a natural human reaction to unexpected loss or withdrawal. It is simply part of the process of adjusting to a new emotional reality. Once the initial shock fades, a woman will naturally begin searching for the reasons behind your loss of interest. Her mind will start to process the situation, seeking clarity and understanding. She may replay conversations, review past interactions, and scrutinize any subtle cues to find a cause. This search for answers is a reflection of her need to make sense of what has happened. Women, like all people, are driven by a desire to understand their relationships and ensure they aren't leaving any loose ends. When the emotional bond begins to fray, it creates a sense of confusion that can only be alleviated through answers. She might ask herself questions like, was it something I did? Or is he seeing someone else? This period of introspection can lead to a cycle of self-doubt, as she wonders whether there was something within her control that triggered your disinterest. In her quest for answers, she might even look to the past, analyzing moments where she felt the connection shift. This is not an attempt to blame herself, but rather an effort to find closure or a reason for the change, to ease the emotional weight of uncertainty. Her need for answers is not driven by manipulation or control, but by a genuine desire to understand. This search often creates a form of tension between you both. She may not express it overtly, but the internal questioning can lead to feelings of insecurity, frustration, or even sadness. If you remain distant or uncommunicative during this period, it can prolong her sense of confusion and leave her feeling more uncertain. It's important to remember that her search for answers is not a rejection of your decision, but a natural response to a shift in emotional dynamics. As she begins to process the reality of your disinterest, a woman may enter a phase where she tests the waters to see if she can regain your attention. This is a natural response to a loss of connection. She might not do this consciously, but on some level, she is trying to gauge whether the emotional distance is temporary or permanent. She may initiate contact in subtle ways, a casual text, a lighthearted comment, or a moment of vulnerability, all designed to test whether you will engage as you once did. It's a way for her to assess whether your withdrawal is truly final, or if there is still a possibility to rekindle the spark that has dimmed. In this phase, her actions are not about manipulation, but about understanding where she stands in your life. She may use humor, flirtation, or even indirect approaches to see if you respond with the same warmth you once did. The way you react to these attempts or fail to react, will give her crucial information about your feelings and intentions. If you show no interest or if you remain indifferent to her attempts to reconnect, she will likely start to accept that the emotional distance is real and lasting. For a Stoic man, this is an opportunity to remain steadfast in his resolve. It's important to understand that her testing is a reflection of her vulnerability and not an attempt to manipulate or provoke a reaction. The key is to stay calm, maintain your boundaries, and avoid being swayed by her emotional cues. A Stoic man does not respond to testing with frustration or confusion, but remains grounded in his principles, making decisions based on what aligns with his values, not momentary feelings or external pressure. As the realization sets in that your interest has faded, a woman may begin to emotionally withdraw. This response is deeply tied to her natural instinct for self-preservation. When she senses that the emotional connection she once relied upon is no longer present, her first instinct may be to protect herself from further disappointment or hurt. This emotional withdrawal is not always overt or dramatic. It can manifest in subtler ways. She may become less expressive, more reserved, or start to distance herself both physically and mentally. Her once eager engagement might turn into moments of silence or disinterest, signaling that she is beginning to detach. This shift is not necessarily a rejection of you or the relationship, but a coping mechanism to shield herself from the pain of feeling neglected or undervalued. She might not immediately acknowledge it to herself, but her actions will reveal a subtle shift in her investment. She may start to keep conversations brief, avoid deep emotional exchanges, or even retreat into her own world. The woman who once reached out for connection now becomes more guarded, more self-contained. Her actions reflect a growing need for emotional security, something she can no longer rely on from you. For the Stoic man, this emotional withdrawal can be seen as a natural part of the relationship cycle. It's important not to take it personally or react with frustration. Instead, understand that her retreat is a self-protective measure. She is recalibrating her emotions in response to the new dynamics between you both. This moment is an opportunity for the Stoic man to remain calm, understanding and resolute in his own sense of emotional stability. He knows that he cannot control her feelings, only his own reactions. As a woman begins to sense your lost interest, her behavior often shifts in subtle yet telling ways. These changes are a natural response to the emotional distance she feels. She might become colder, more distant, or even passive-aggressive in her interactions with you. The warmth and openness that once characterized her approach may now be replaced by guardedness or emotional withdrawal. These shifts in behavior aren't necessarily intentional acts of manipulation or retaliation, but rather expressions of her discomfort and uncertainty. She is grappling with the reality that the connection she once felt is no longer mutual. She might respond with frustration or a sharpness that wasn't there before, as her mind tries to reconcile the emotional disconnect. This shift is often a form of silent protest, a way for her to express that she feels neglected or unseen. On the other hand, she might begin to disengage entirely, pulling back even further as a way to protect herself from emotional vulnerability. The once eager communication becomes sparse, and even when she does engage, the conversation might feel more transactional or forced. For a Stoic man, it's crucial to remain calm and not to react impulsively to these changes. The key is to understand that her behavior is a reflection of her emotional state, not necessarily a direct attack on you. She is processing the loss and attempting to navigate her own feelings of rejection. The Stoic response is to remain composed, acknowledging that while her actions may seem harsh, they are part of her process. A man who has mastered his own emotions will not be swayed by her shifting behavior, but will instead choose to respond with understanding, clarity, and emotional fortitude. Eventually, a woman will reach a point where she either accepts the change in the relationship dynamic or makes one final push to regain your attention. If she chooses acceptance, it's often after a period of internal reflection and emotional processing. She has come to terms with the fact that the connection she once cherished is no longer mutual. This acceptance isn't immediate and may take time, as it requires her to adjust emotionally to the new reality. Once she has accepted the situation, she begins to detach and move on, no longer investing the same level of energy or hope into the relationship. This is a natural response to the emotional withdrawal she has experienced, and it often marks the end of the emotional bond. On the other hand, if she is unwilling to accept the shift, she may make one last attempt to rekindle your interest. This final push could take various forms, whether it's through increased attention, emotional vulnerability, or subtle attempts to trigger a reaction. At this stage, her actions are driven by a desire to understand if the connection can be salvaged or if your disinterest is permanent. The push may be an attempt to regain some semblance of control over the situation, hoping for a change in your behavior or a return to how things once were. For the Stoic man, this moment calls for unwavering clarity and emotional control. Whether she chooses to accept the reality or make one last effort, the Stoic man remains grounded in his principles. He does not react impulsively but responds with a calm resolve, understanding that relationships evolve and not all connections are meant to last. His focus is on maintaining his integrity, regardless of the direction the relationship ultimately takes.